Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is Friday, January 8th, 2021. I'm recording tonight in Sanibel, Florida. It's a quiet island, but it's just as roiled by this week's drama in D.C. as I'm sure it is where you live. Really, it's been news all over the world, not just here in the U.S., but dramatic events that we've been following. It helps to be in a quiet place and with Darlene and her sister and connected to various connections that I have. I have a new connection now. That's my guest, Greg Epstein, who I enjoyed talking with this week to bring you the interview for this episode. Greg is Humanist Chaplain at Harvard and MIT, an unusual role that turns out to have quite a history, and I was interested to hear about it, particularly because some of it started back when I was at Harvard 50 years ago. We talked about work-life balance, tech addiction, ethics and technology, and how Harvard and MIT students approach the world differently, perhaps. And you're also going to hear how Greg's and my stories kind of overlap through a connection with my mother, who passed away in 2018. Let's get started. Before we get to my conversation with Greg, I want to pass along a tech tip. It's maybe more like a bit of tech history that has given me something to think about here in Sanibel. When we packed up our gear to come down here for 4 months and drove down in the Tesla, I packed an Echo Tap. Now, that's a device that is not available anymore, but it was a rechargeable speaker, kind of a cylinder like the original Echo, and it sat on a pad that was like a charging device or dock, and so you plug it in and charge it, but then you could move it around. And when it was playing music, it was pretty handy because you didn't have to have wires. But they upgraded it so that it would also work as an Alexa device. And I thought that we could just use it for Alexa here at the rental in Sanibel. Well, it turns out that the Tap really isn't so well set up for that. It had a button that you press to talk to it for a microphone, but it doesn't have a very good built-in microphone compared with the newer equipment. So this results in frustrated sounds when I'm here in the bedroom and Darlene and Deb are asking Alexa for some question having to do with cooking the meal. They end up shouting at it. Alexa, how do you cook broccoli in a microwave? And it's just getting too frustrating. So I wanted to upgrade to an Echo Dot, but they were out of stock. I was checking the last couple of weeks, but tonight I went in and I can get an Echo Dot for $30. That's $20 off. It's in stock. It'll be here in a few days. And this will have to be plugged in, but it will have so many more microphones and far field ability to hear that it is going to lower the temperature, I think, for Deb and Darlene when they're trying to get some help from Alexa here at the house. So this is a good one, too. It's smaller. It's round. The new Dots and Echoes are round, so this would fit in a suitcase really easily. And so if you're traveling, it's a good option. If you have your Echo Tap, you probably get plenty of years of use out of it, but just make sure you get close to it and speak really loudly because the Tap is a little hard of hearing. Time now for the interview. Greg Epstein holds a BA in Religion and Chinese and an MA in Judaic Studies from the University of Michigan. He also has a Master's of Theological Studies from the Harvard Divinity School. In 2005, he was ordained as a humanist rabbi by the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. That year, he was also appointed Humanist Chaplain at Harvard, and in 2018, he began concurrently serving in the same role at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Greg wrote an insightful piece titled "My Name is Greg and I'm Addicted to Tech" that was published in the Boston Globe on New Year's Day. Listener Gary LaRue emailed me a link to the essay, and that prompted me to reach out to Greg for this week's show. I reached him on Wednesday, January 6th, connecting by Skype to his home in Somerville, Mass., and I began by asking how he came to hold the position of Humanist Chaplain at Harvard.
the idea is Harvard had the first ever humanist chaplain at a college or university anywhere in the world. And that was my predecessor and friend and mentor. His name was Tom Ferrick. He was a former Catholic priest who was an orphan in the Great Depression, was raised in the Catholic Church and in orphanages, and really always wanted to be a priest. And when he got to be a young priest, sort of realized that his faith in God and Catholicism was collapsing, but he still wanted to lead that kind of life. He was inspired to help people and listen and work for a better world. And so he discovered something called the organized humanist movement and set out to remain a chaplain. He'd been a chaplain at Dartmouth College as a Catholic priest.
There's a part of his story that's fascinating. Perhaps it was in the obit you wrote. He went to Dartmouth as a Catholic chaplain, mission to spread the gospel. And in your telling, it sounds like the students changed his. They evangelized him.
Right.
And
I mean, I wasn't there. This was in the 50s, but I love to picture him. He was really open-minded, generous, great listener. And I picture him getting to Dartmouth College and saying, I am here to listen and to discuss with you anything that you want to discuss and to consider any ideas that you wish to consider. And I think that they just considered him right out of his faith.
Wow.
And the fact that he was a gay man and he was figuring that out about himself didn't hurt or help, depending on your perspective. It gave him pause to really think about what he could affiliate himself with. And he bravely set out to be an openly gay man in the 1960s and beyond. Wow. And so he established a chaplaincy at Harvard in the early to mid 1970s after sort of a long journey to figure out, how one affiliates oneself and establishes oneself. But the powers that be, which included the Reverend Peter J. Gomes, the famous Harvard preacher, sort of took a look at him when he knocked on the door back in the 70s and thought, this is my big, paraphrase telling of it, that, we're trying to be more open-minded at Harvard now. We're trying to be more pluralistic. We can't exactly say no to this qualified gentleman with a different worldview than all of our previous chaplains have had. So let's let him in. He'll probably be gone in a couple of years or whatever will happen. And in fact, he stayed for 30 years and was able to bring me along and help me to be here for quite a while as well.
I was at Harvard when Peter Gomes showed up, and I was at the Fox Club, and we invited him to lunch. And here's this shiny new guy, tremendously exciting guy. He turned out to be one of America's best preachers. Did he and Tom end up becoming personal friends?
They did. Yes, they were friends. They had, I think, stories about each other that I still don't really feel like I'm allowed to tell, even though they're both no longer living. But because they were both gay men in Boston, Cambridge in the 70s and beyond, they became friends. They supported each other. They regularly talked. And I studied with Peter Gomes as a Harvard graduate student, and he was very kind to me and took me aside for a number of good conversations over the years.
Yeah, he was a remarkable man. He was a great friend of my mother. She went to that morning chapel. I think when I was at Harvard, she was going to morning chapel, probably praying for me, and I never even knew that she was doing it, but she did it for like 30 or 40 years and became fast friends with Peter. Interesting.
Well, you seem to have done all right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, now, when you so you're there at Harvard for a while, quite a while, and then in 2018, how did it come about that you added MIT?
What happened was when I first got to Harvard, nobody really knew about this idea of humanist chaplains. It was quite an obscure thing. There were 2 or 3 humanist chaplains at universities in the United States, and the role at Harvard was basically the only paid role. The other two were volunteer positions. And I felt that this was something that could be shared much more widely, that there was a rising generation of people who were not interested in traditional religious affiliation, but might very well be interested in something beyond simply being nothing. And that humanism fit the bill for me personally in a way that was surprising and wonderful. And I thought, this has a future. This is simply an underappreciated, underpublicized notion. So the first few years were setting out to spread the word and to let people know, and especially once best-selling books about atheism began to spread out around the country, around the world. The idea was to let people know that this is not something where we're merely against religion, where we're merely against belief in God, that it's possible to have a very positive, ethical, deeply human and grounded worldview that you take on for yourself, that you create for yourself with others beyond religion and beyond certainly just atheism. So the first few years were about that. And at the end of that initial period, I wrote a book called Good Without God that spelled out that message. And I ended the book with the idea of community, with the idea that the most important aspect of religion historically has been its sense of community, its ability to provide human beings with community. And the idea in my head, as somebody that at that point was, I wrote the book in my late 20s, early 30s, was we were going to go out and do it. We were going to build a congregation or a community, and really many congregations and communities, just in the way that you do if you're a religious person who wants to build such things. And so we built the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard as it had originally been titled, which when I took over in 2005 had a $27,000 annual budget, into a much bigger organization that eventually had about a $500,000 annual budget and a large center and staff and that sort of thing. And we even took on responsibilities for helping people elsewhere to build up communities and congregations for humanists and atheists and agnostics and allies. But around 2016, 2017, for a number of reasons, including the fact that I had my first child that year, and it really changed something in me in terms of how I wanted to look at myself and my own life and my work and my work-life balance, if you call it that. And so, I knew that something was changing, and I was really becoming convinced that a standard or traditional congregation for humanists and the non-religious was not the direction that I wanted to take the rest of my life in. But I still love the role. I still love the work. I still love advocating for humanists and the non-religious and sort of being there for them. I was trying to figure out how. And then I got this offer to join MIT in addition to my work at Harvard. And, in previous years, that topic had kind of come up, but I thought, I'm kind of busy over here. And I looked at it more in terms of, the prestige factor, right? Like Harvard is a prestigious school, MIT is a prestigious school, but if I already was at one, why did I need the other, right? Mm-hmm. But in 2018, something new occurred to me, which is MIT is primarily a tech school, right?
Right.
And I started thinking about technology and the role of technology in people's lives, and particularly in the lives of students, young people who are tasked themselves with shaping the future of technology. And I realized that we have become now such a technological and technical society that you could really even say that technology has become the largest secular religion human beings have ever created. It plays a similar role in our lives to what the role of gods and religions in the past. It shapes our meaning. It shapes our day-to-day experience. It's the goal of our life and our work in many cases. It's the place that we go. It's the ritual that we perform. It's what we believe in, frankly, above many other things, if not all other things. And I realized that being at MIT would be a chance to convene conversations around just that and help people to think about whether or not we really want to have that kind of relationship with technology, or is there something better that we can do? Is there a better way to conceive of ourselves in light of what we've created that may one day eclipse us? And so the last couple of years have just been this fascinating opportunity to have that conversation in places and ways that I never thought I would.
It's a mind-bending insight to see technology itself playing the role of religion, and you having a chance to go there. It's almost as if someone who had concerns about values had a chance to go to Rome and help the Catholic Church chart its path in future decades or centuries, because you got right to, Stanford, MIT. You're one of the main nodes of the technology religion, and well, I guess that's fascinating. What did you find there in terms of the students at MIT being ready to engage from your point of view on these questions compared to the kinds of conversations that you're having as a humanist chaplain at Harvard?
I mean, everybody's an individual, of course, but one thing that I've found at MIT in terms of people's tendencies is that the students at Harvard, first of all, are so self-selected because it's a group of people, especially these days, that it is so predisposed towards overachievement. Yeah. In across the board, right? Like Harvard is, other than legacies and things like that, which is sort of a topic for another time. Harvard selects for people who can and really will, above anything, demonstrate achievement. Even if it kills them, they'll achieve in every way, in every category, in every minute. Across lines of talent and sort of different aspects of the human experience, MIT students excel, extraordinarily so in technical fields, but they're not necessarily trying to exude achievement from every pore of their body, in every aspect of life. And so there's a kind of sincerity, a kind of earnestness that one can find more often in an MIT student who's not actively trying to project such greatness in every moment of their waking life, that I've found refreshing and fascinating. And it's not to say that all my Harvard students are doing that. In fact, I tend to gravitate towards working more closely with the Harvard students that are the exception to the rule that I was just sort of spelling out. But in any way, this kind of earnest desire to reflect on behalf of some of the students that I've met at MIT on what is this all for anyway? I don't know what it's for. I have these skills. I'm working towards them. I'm developing them, but I'm just kind of concerned, like what is it that I'm really doing with my life? That is a conversation that I just love to have.
Well, I can imagine that's a fascinating way to describe the difference between the two communities. At MIT, I imagine you have a chance to talk with students who do come from a faith that they haven't rejected, whether it's Christian or whatever, grappling with these questions. And then you've got the non-religious students who are more perhaps drawn to your work. Do you see any differences in how a young person who is comfortable within a faith tradition, a religion, addresses technology versus the people that are sort of part of your community?
Well, first of all, not necessarily in the sense that I never like to generalize about religious people or religious students in particular, especially not in a negative way. One thing that I want people who are new to my work to understand really well is that I'm a huge believer in pluralism. Pluralism is the interconnection and the collaboration, the cooperation among people of very different beliefs and backgrounds, despite or maybe even because of their difference in beliefs, that there's a belief that this world is for all of us and that we are all worthy, regardless of our theological beliefs, of full inclusion in what it means to be a citizen of this country or this world. And so, I have over the years learned a tremendous amount from religious leaders, religious colleagues, religious friends, and even in some cases now as a chaplain for 17 years from religious students. And so, this is not about, well, my humanist students are great and here's why, and the religious students are, whatever else, and here's why. But, I will say this. The thing that I really appreciate about people and that I think is, is an important characteristic of a lot of the humanist students that I work with is a sense that we are not just agnostic in the sense of, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's true. I'm not sure. It could be this. It could be that. That's a perfectly reasonable perspective to adopt for a lot of people under certain circumstances, but it doesn't really take us very far in life if we're unwilling to make a commitment to a philosophy of life. To say, here is why I am deciding to live. Here is what I am deciding to do with this life that I miraculously, even in a scientific sense of the word miraculously, have, right? And so I appreciate people who take a look at the evidence that they see about the world around them and make a decision to say the best interpretation that I can make of the evidence of why I'm here and what I'm meant to do is, in the humanist case, that there is no single overarching reason or purpose to my life that comes down to me from heaven, which is a phenomenon I have no evidence for, but rather it's my responsibility, because of that freedom from any of those things, to decide for myself that I'm going to do good and live a good and meaningful and worthwhile life in subjective terms in this world. And so I always appreciate religious students or religious people who, sort of make a similar or parallel choice, from their religious perspective. They say, look, I kind of realize that I've got a lot of different ways that I could live my life, but I'm going to adopt these sincere principles, and these earnest beliefs, and I'm going to do the very best that I can based on them. Now, for some, that then takes away a belief in science that, in a way that causes real problems, as we can see in our political life today. But there are a lot of religious people, of course, who are very progressive and very much believers in science. One calls to mind the Reverend Raphael Warnock, for example, right? Hopefully our next senator. And so, those people are my allies, my friends, and often I learn great lessons from them about character and compassion, and even reason.
It recalls for me, there's a phrase that Mayor Pete used a lot during the campaign. We did some work for him, and he would talk about people of good faith. And when he was criticized for going on Fox, he said, the audience that watches Fox are people of good faith, and shame on us if we don't tell them how we see the world. I think he thought some of the opinion people on Fox weren't people of good faith. And I always wanted to ask him, I said, well, how do you know if someone is speaking or acting in good faith? It sounds like a wonderful phrase. And I had a chance to ask another pastor friend of mine, Bryan Hudson in Indianapolis. He said that he sees people of good faith, and he was setting it in terms of Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which was addressed to white clergy. He said there were white clergy in the South who were people of good faith because they might change their minds if they were exposed to the truth. And I thought that was a pretty significant way to test, my good faith. And it kind of goes back to Tom Ferrick, because in a way he exemplified that in a major way by going to Dartmouth as a Catholic chaplain, and he was willing to change his mind based on what his students were telling him.
And not just change his mind, by the way, but he changed his life.
Yeah,
that's the key. There's a lot of people that change their minds, but they don't change their life. They don't change their behavior.
Good point. Yeah.
And that's something that I want to emphasize. I was trained, and I really love that I was trained to recognize or to affirm that humanism is not as much about faith or belief as it is about action and behavior. And so, for example, when I just did a wedding ceremony recently, or when I do a ceremony as a chaplain to welcome a new baby with a family, we talk about giving the person that you love your greatest gift, which is the gift of your loving behavior, right? Because we all know that you can have somebody in your life who says, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Oh, I really, really, really love you. But they don't treat you that way, right? They don't act that way. And what is it really worth at that point? Not necessarily all that much.
Right.
And so, to me, you can have somebody who professes a humanist faith like mine, who doesn't really take the time and the effort to behave that way. And you can have somebody who professes a faith that I completely disagree with, but takes the time to help people to think things through, to act justly, to act righteously, and even to act in accordance with science. And that's great. So, I'm interested in building coalitions of people, from across the spectrum of belief who want the best for humanity and are willing to act that way.
And are willing to change their minds and their lives when they encounter the truth.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good group. Well, let's finish up on the topic of your Globe piece, which I found really thought-provoking. This issue of tech addiction, and you shared some of your own personal experience in the Smart Recovery group. I'm interested just in your personal practice these days around technology. How are you trying to find that balance in a way that flows out of your values as a humanist?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm any kind of model for a great relationship with technology, but I'm trying. I'm working on it. And the piece, which yes, it was in the Boston Globe Ideas section a couple days ago, as of this conversation, and it was. It came out of the idea that I've been writing about technology. I've been exploring the world of technology these last couple of years, but I just noticed that my own life has often been dominated by technology, in the sense that when I log on, I can't necessarily log off. I really have trouble, and I have for well over a decade now, with just detaching myself from this world of, relatively mundane pedestrian things like, the NewYorkTimes.com or ESPN.com or websites like Facebook and Twitter and, other stuff like that. Email, just regular old email, pulling me in and not letting me go. And I've been trying to figure out for a long time now what that was about. And I even, I went to a recovery group about this back in 2008 when nobody almost had heard of anything like tech addiction, because the tools to addict us were really at a much earlier stage at that point. But I felt addicted. And as I write about in the piece, part of that stems from my own quirky life experience where I had this notion back when I was sort of prepubescent that I had an addictive personality, and I try to detail why. And I do that because I think it's sort of funny, like how one even figures out as a 29, 30-year-old or whatever it is in the first decade of this century that one is a tech addict. But the point is that despite my own personal quirkiness, this is something that is just an across-the-board phenomenon right now. I mean, most people are probably addicted to this stuff. It's sort of the way that if you look back now, like I was watching a little bit the other day of the new HBO Perry Mason show. About a detective in the 1930s. And if you look at how everybody smokes back then, right? I mean, every single person is addicted to cigarettes back then. And it's really kind of like that now. Most people are tech addicts at this point, and at least in American society. And so what do we do about it? How can we manage that? What is that? What the future looks like? Is it how many generations down are we going to be tech addicts, or is it just going to be every generation from now on until death, or until they used to say, right, the World War III will be fought with nuclear weapons and World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones? I mean, is that going to be the story of our relationship with technology? Right? Is that what it's going to take to dislodge us from what we've created? And so, I wanted to reflect on it, and I wanted to try a couple of new devices. One is called a light phone. Another is called the Remarkable tablet, that enable you to do some of the main things that you're really trying purposefully to do in a good way with digital life. Call people, text people, get messages, write down your thoughts and have them be preserved, so you can go back to them later and reference them and continue working on them without the distraction of the internet and this sort of this random intermittent feedback, as B.F. Skinner, the behavioral psychologist, described it. It talked about in terms of, just a system that's perfectly designed to hook us the way gambling is. And I had a pretty good experience using those devices, but it's a pandemic and we're all using our computers and our digital tech to just see one another. We desperately need human connection. That's not going away. And when we're being told, and I buy it, I believe it, that the responsible thing is to talk to each other in this tech-mediated way. I mean, we're almost literally doing this for survival. And so, I give myself a bit of an out in that sense. I mean, I'm not going to be some sort of superhuman person that ignores my tech when it's my only, link to other people. But at the same time, I have to recognize that that's digging my addiction deeper and deeper. And there's going to be a moment of reckoning at some point.
When you were the Smart Recovery movement started with a Harvard professor, a nonprofit, sort of decoupling from higher power and kind of religious terminology that's pretty central to AA. Do you remember, how did you define abstinence from your tech addiction when you were participating in that movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's not abstinence. The Smart Recovery, which people can go to smartrecovery.org. It's a wonderful website where literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world participate in meetings and programs and in getting tools for managing addictive behavior, not for curing a disease, because from the perspective of this secular science-based alternative recovery method, addiction is not a disease. It's not something that's physically happening to you in the same way that cancer is, for example. although you may be rewiring yourself, through your own behavior, but it's different than a disease. It's not something where you necessarily must be 100% abstinent from all things in order to maintain a chip. There's no higher power that you need to submit to. The idea is that human beings develop behavior patterns for a reason, and that we experience powerful, often painful emotions and thoughts that are real and that are for a reason. And likely we develop addictive tendencies, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or anything else, including the internet, because we experience real pain. Love hurts, relationships hurt, the pressure to achieve something in life hurts. The fact that we're all mortal and we see our loved ones get sick and die, or we see injustice happen, or we're the victims of injustice ourselves, or whatever it is. These things hurt, and so we need and we crave, understandably, some kind of experience to help ease the pain and give us something pleasurable to focus on. And so if you have some kind of addiction or addictive tendency, it's almost surely because at some point you very understandably and rightfully were in pain and needed something to help. And it may have even been just fine at the beginning. If you were a kid, for example, having a few drinks or a few cigarettes or whatever, going to the horse races, it was understandable and it was probably okay at the beginning. But then it may have developed into something beyond that, something that is simply no longer constructive or helpful for you or for the people you love or for both. And at that point, however, we can't just stop often because we've developed a pattern, we've developed a reliance on the thing that goes beyond us, and that is often just too hard for us to get ourselves out of on our own. And so this is about taking the tools of cognitive psychology, of other kinds of psychology, and even psychotherapy, and also of group support, community support, and using them to help one another to choose something better. And one of the, I'll say this, so I know we can't get into smart recovery in every way today, but one of the things that I love about it is that it essentially says that in the end, you may not be able to do this right away if you're first starting to deal with a really painful or really dangerous addiction, like to a drug that can endanger your life or the lives of others. You may not right away be able to look at it from a big picture perspective, but eventually, in order to long-term overcome your addiction, what you're going to need to do is actually add something to your life that fulfills you, that satisfies you, that does give you a sense of pleasure and connection and hope and enjoyment. But that's just more healthy than the thing that you've been doing up till now. And it's not about depriving ourselves. It's about wishing a good and a good life for each of us. And it's about kind of, can you disengage from the painful addiction for long enough to sit back and think, well, who am I? And what is going to give me a sense of pleasure and fulfillment in a healthy way for the rest of my life? I love that about it.
Well, anything else?
I guess I would just say that, if folks like yourself are interested, they can go to our website is harvardhumanist.org. It's a pretty spare website these days, but we're doing a lot. They can sign up for our newsletter and, get the occasional email. We don't mind a little support from folks if they want to send us a donation or what have you. I maintain a presence on Twitter. I actually like Twitter. It's a way for me to kind of clear my throat and do my first draft thoughts. So they can follow me there. I just wish people a happy exploration of these ideas.
I have been speaking with Greg Epstein, Humanist Chaplain at Harvard and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Thanks very much, Greg.
Thank you, Len. Great speaking to you.
As an afterword, I'd like to say a word about smart recovery, which Greg mentioned. He noted that hundreds of thousands of people are participating in the program, so it's clearly a significant option for people seeking to recover from addiction. And I wanted to leave Greg's thorough description of the program in the interview in case someone might want to follow up on it. And I'll have a link to smartrecovery.org in the show notes. I'll also include a link to AA.org. That's the website for Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's a fellowship with an estimated 2 million members worldwide, including 1.3 million in the U.S. And I have about 35 years of experience in that program, and it's not for everyone. And I think sometimes when something's really working for you, you can become a bit of an evangelist. I'm always just open to talk about the way that has worked for me to recover, and I was glad to learn about a new program that got its start at Harvard. I enjoyed talking with Greg about his work because I knew so little about humanism's early roots on the campus when I was at Harvard 50 years ago. That said, there were no doubt more humanists than Christians at the Harvard Crimson, the daily student newspaper where I spent most of my sophomore year as a news reporter. But in that setting, my own faith was respected by my fellow journalists. I can't find it online in the archive, but I wrote a feature article for the Crimson. It was a page one story, and the headline was, "Will Jesus Save Harvard?" And it was an account of the Harvard Radcliffe Christian Fellowship, the evangelical organization of which I was a member at the time. I've always felt drawn to people who have figured out what matters most in their life and proceed to follow it like a North Star. And Greg Epstein is firmly in that category. So I'm glad I had a chance to meet with him this week during our conversation. And I also enjoyed the chance to hear about the Reverend Peter Gomes and to imagine that he and my mother Lois from time to time are enjoying laughs over tea in an elegant sunny setting, a version of the Harvard Faculty Club perhaps, but with a much better view. I'd like to share a couple of comments. One came from Gary LaRue, who, as I said, was the one that told me about the article by Greg Epstein. He said, "I hope you can recruit Greg for a future episode. It should be a fascinating conversation." Well, I hope it was. I enjoyed it. Gary says, "I know of him from a friend who is a staunch humanist who told me about the book Good Without God." That's the book that Greg wrote a number of years ago. Gary continues, "The topic of our always-on connectivity is an important one. I, too, am cognizant of the time I spend looking at screens and digitally connected. I have eschewed using Apple's screen time reporting app, as all screen time isn't the same. Perhaps I'm rationalizing when I write that, but I regard listening to podcasts on my iPhone as more fruitful than scrolling Instagram or Facebook, for example. Nonetheless, I do reach for my iPhone at inappropriate times when I awaken in the morning, talking with family, eating, bored. Your resolution not to pick up the phone when talking with someone is one I am renewing, as I can't claim success, as well as mindfully focusing on the taste of food when eating." That's another good practice. He continues, "Ironically, I am adding another electronic tool to my portfolio, ordering a Halo yesterday." That's the Amazon Halo, the kind of fitness band with some other features. He writes, "I've listened to your experience using it and am interested in how it can help me with two use cases, I won't say needs, that I've wanted to explore for several years, counting steps and monitoring sleep. I had a simple Fitbit several years ago, the model with no screen, which was designed to clip on a belt. I kept it unattached in my pocket and lost it when I was riding in a taxi in Shanghai. I never replaced it. I have used the iPhone for counting steps, yet I don't always have it in hand, and I don't have a way to measure the quality of my sleep. The halo seems unobtrusive, which I can wear both active and sleeping. I'll let you know how it works out. You are likely keeping up with the weather. Hear from your family. Our pre-white Christmas snow, Carrie lives in New Hampshire, washed away during the Christmas rain. Last night we had another storm which started as snow and turned to rain, leaving slush this morning. I see you are enjoying 70 degrees today. I'm envious. Best, Gary. That's great. Appreciate that, Gary. And I'm using the halo. I feel like there's more to learn from it. These labs that they put up and they keep changing, adding new ones. I haven't given up trying to improve my sleep using this device. And the tone stuff where it tells you whether you sound happy or energetic or not, that's something that I know I'm going to have some fun experimenting with. I haven't figured out quite how I'm going to do an organized look at it. I received a great long email from Dave Peter, Charlotte, North Carolina, a week or so ago. And I'm going to read, it's going to be a serial letter. So I'm going to read you the first part of it because it's fun to look back in kind of the history of the show and the history of the Kindle. Len, I hope this email finds you well during your stay in Florida. This email is long overdue, and I have started off the new year resolved to get her done today. I first wrote to you about the podcast circa 2010, if memory serves. I had been on a golf trip with my college buddies, and I just purchased the Kindle keyboard. I think that was the Kindle 3. And I was hooked from the minute I opened the box. On the golf trip, one of my friends had an iPad, and we got into a debate about what was the better reading device. Over the course of the conversation, he said to me, "You should listen to the Kindle Chronicles." I love it. I took his advice and have not missed an episode since. At the time, I was not listening to any podcasts, and now they are a staple in my life. You actually mentioned this reading device debate story in an episode back then. The next time I wrote to you was a year later, as I had gotten my kids the Barnes & Noble Nook. The reason I chose the Nook at the time was that it did not have an internet browser, and the Kindle, they had the basic one, but no way to parent the content, to sort of give parental guidance for the content. I did a bunch of research and even reached out to Amazon directly about turning off the browser, and at the time came away with a firm "it cannot be done." You also mentioned the scenario in an episode. Wow, how times have changed since then. My sons are now 24, 21, and 18, so they're not taking parental guidance on what they're reading on their Kindle or other devices, I'm sure. So that's pretty cool, just to look back 10 years and hear from someone who's listening to the podcast since then. I know lots of others of you have listened that long as well, so it's quite a journey we've been on, and it continues. My guest next week, I'm going to have two guests on, Thad McElroy and Cliff Gurin. They are two of three co-authors of a very smart analysis. The title is COVID-19 and Book Publishing, Impacts and Insights for 2021. It's about a 20-page paper, and it's available for free download. If you go to the show notes for this episode at thekindlechronicles.com, you'll be able to download it. It's a thoughtful and insightful look into how COVID has affected books and reading and what might be ahead. So I think we'll have a very interesting conversation about that for next week's show. Week after that, I'm hoping to get somebody from the Kindle team at Amazon just to catch us up on, there was a major update on the software I talked about last week, and there's a woman that I might be talking to that I spoke to a year and a half ago. There's always new improvements on the Kindle devices, and they don't always get touted at some big media preview. So this is going to be a great opportunity to connect with somebody and maybe have some Easter eggs, things we can do on the Kindle that we didn't know we could do, and also how to use that series feature, which is in the new update, that'll really help you if you like to read mystery series or romance series and find out which books of a series you have and which ones you want to buy. And, of course, Amazon will make it really easy to buy the ones you don't. I'm sitting here by an open window. It's 64 degrees here in Sanibel, a nice cool breeze coming in, and it really is delightful here. It was a little cloudy today, but I had a bike ride. Red tide is still not something that's too pleasant because it keeps me from swimming in the ocean, which I really love doing. And I think the forecast, they give you a forecast for red tide down here, and Darlene said it's looks like the weekend's going to have more of it than we've had during the week. Minor problems, and still very grateful to be here until around April 1st. Thanks for listening. Great to have you with me tonight, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks.